Before you read another word, let me tell you something I've learned the hard way. Up here where the air gets thin, and the wind doesn't care whose name you were born with. A person can survive almost anything. Cold, hunger, the slow grind of years that takes your teeth and your knees and the people you loved one by one. I've watched men endure things that would have folded most folks in half. But there's one thing I've seen break a soul faster than any blizzard, faster than starvation, faster than grief itself. And that's the belief, settled deep in the marrow, that nobody on this earth was ever going to claim you. That you don't belong anywhere. That if you vanished tomorrow, the world wouldn't so much as hiccup. I met a girl once who carried that belief like a stone sewn into her chest. And I'm going to tell you what happened when a man with more scars than sense decided to do something about it. Stay with me. This one changed me, and I don't say that about much anymore. Some stories you tell to pass the time. This one I tell because if I don't, I'm afraid the wind will take it, and she deserved better than to be forgotten. I found her on the ridge in October, the morning the first real frost came down off the peaks and silvered every blade of grass in the valley. I'd gone out before dawn to check the trap line, the way I'd done every cold morning for the better part of 40 years. My breath hung in front of my face. The dog, old Juniper, gray in the muzzle and slow in the hips, kept stopping to sniff at something in the wind, then looking back at me like she expected me to explain it. I didn't have an explanation. I figured it was a deer, or maybe that lean cougar that had been working the high country since summer. It wasn't a deer. She was sitting against the broken granite at the top of the ridge, knees pulled to her chest, arms wrapped around them so tight it looked like she was trying to hold herself together by force. No coat worth the name. A thin canvas jacket 2 sizes too big, the kind a person grabs because it's the only thing left on the rack, not because it fits or because it'll keep them warm. Her boots had a hole worn clean through the left toe. Her lips had gone the color of a bruise. I have spent most of my life avoiding people. I'll be honest about that. I came up to this mountain after the war, not the big famous ones you read about, a smaller, meaner one that the history books mostly forgot. And I came up here precisely because I'd had my fill of human beings and the things they do to each other. I built a cabin with my own hands. I learned to want for nothing that another person could give me. And for the most part it worked. For the most part I was content with the company of the dog and the elk, and the long blue evenings. So understand that when I saw that girl on the ridge, every instinct I'd spent 4 decades sharpening told me to turn around, to pretend I hadn't seen, to let the mountain handle its own business the way it always had. I didn't turn around. I don't entirely know why. I'd like to tell you it was decency, but I'm not sure I had that much of it left by then. Maybe it was the dog who had already trotted up to the girl and was pushing her cold gray head under the girl's frozen hand. Maybe it was the way the girl looked at Juniper, and for just a second something moved behind her eyes that hadn't moved in a long while. A flicker, like a coal you thought was dead, breathing once when the wind finds it. "You picked a hard place to sit," I said. She startled so violently she nearly went over backward off the rock. Her hand came up not to defend herself, I realized later, but to shield her face, the reflex of someone who has learned that a raised hand from a stranger usually means something is about to land. That gesture told me more than an hour of talking could have. I have never forgotten it. I think about it still on the bad nights. "I'm not doing anything," she said. The words came out fast and flat and rehearsed, the way a person says a thing they've had to say many times. "I'll move. I'm not bothering anybody. I'll go." "Didn't say you were bothering anybody." I crouched down, slow, the way you do with a wild thing, keeping my hands where she could see them. My knees popped like wet wood in a fire and I winced, and something in her face eased a fraction at the ordinary human frailty of an old man's bad joints. "Said you picked a hard place. Wind comes straight down off Granger Peak right across this ridge. Colder up here than anywhere in the valley. You been here all night." She didn't answer, but she didn't have to. The frost was thick on her shoulders. She'd been there long enough to become part of the landscape. I have thought a great deal in the years since about how close she came. Another hour, maybe two. The cold doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just gathers you up gentle like sleep. She told me later she'd stopped feeling cold sometime in the dark and had thought with a strange flat calm that this was probably the easiest way it had ever been offered to her, that she'd been almost grateful. I didn't know any of that yet. All I knew was that she was the color of a corpse and shaking in a way that had nothing left of warmth in it, and that if I didn't get her down off that ridge she was going to die there, and the dog and I were going to have to walk back past the place where she died every morning for the rest of our lives. "Come on," I said, and held out my hand. She looked at it like it might be a trap. I understood that too, though I didn't yet know the shape of all the reasons. A hand held out in her experience had rarely meant what it appeared to mean. "I've got a cabin," I said, "1.5 miles down, wood stove, coffee. I'm not asking you to do anything but get warm. You can leave the second you're able to walk straight. I won't stop you, I won't follow you. You don't owe me a word." Still she didn't move. So I did the only thing I could think of. I took off my own coat, the good wool one, the one I'd had since before she was likely born, and I laid it over her shoulders, and I stood up, and I started walking back down the trail. Slow, not looking back, letting her decide. I made it maybe 30 yards before I heard her boots on the frozen ground behind me. Her name was Wren. She told me that much on the walk down in pieces between long silences. Just Wren. When I asked her last name, she said she didn't have one that meant anything, and the way she said it shut the door on that question for a good while. The cabin sat in a little fold of the mountain where the trees broke the worst of the wind, a creek running close enough that I could hear it from the porch in the quiet hours. I'd built it for one man and a dog, and that's about all it held: a stove, a table, a bunk, shelves I'd put up myself crowded with the accumulated debris of a solitary life. Books, jars, a rifle. The skull of a ram I'd found in a drawer 20 years back and kept because it was beautiful, and because no one was around to tell me it was strange to keep such a thing. She stood in the doorway like she didn't know how to enter a room. I want you to understand that exactly. Not shy, not polite. She genuinely did not seem to possess the ordinary knowledge of how a body moves into a warm space that belongs to someone else, where to put her hands, where to look, how to occupy a square of floor without apologizing for it. "Sit by the stove," I said. "I'll get the coffee going." She sat on the very edge of the chair, ready to bolt, the borrowed coat still around her shoulders. Juniper flopped down across her feet with a groan, and I saw the girl go very still, the way you do when something fragile and unexpected is happening and you're afraid that moving will end it. After a moment, her hand came down and rested on the dog's ribs, just rested there. She didn't pet her. She just held her hand against the warm rise and fall of the old dog's breathing, like she was checking that it was real. I got the coffee going. I cut bread and the last of the elk, and I put it in front of her without ceremony, and I watched her try not to fall on it like an animal, and I watched her lose that battle, and I turned away and busied myself with the stove so she wouldn't have to be ashamed in front of me. There are kindnesses that are louder when they're done with your back turned. My grandmother taught me that 100 years ago in another life. It was about the only useful thing she ever taught me. When she'd eaten, she sat with the coffee cupped in both hands, breathing the steam, and slowly the blue went out of her lips and a little color came back into her, and she looked less like something the mountain had killed and more like a person. "Why are you doing this?" she said. It wasn't quite a question, it had suspicion in it. And under the suspicion something rower and more frightened. The fear of a person who has learned that kindness is the bait on a hook, that nothing comes free, that the bill always comes due, and it's always more than you can pay. "Because you were cold," I said. "People don't," she stopped, started again. "Nobody does something for nothing." "I'm doing this for nothing." I sat down across from her. "I've got more nothing than just about anybody you'll ever meet. I can afford to give some away." She almost smiled at that. Almost. It surfaced and went under again like a trout. She stayed that night because the alternative was the cold, and she stayed the next night because a storm came in and laid down a foot of snow, and she stayed the night after that because, I think, she had simply run out of the will to keep running. A person can only flee for so long before exhaustion does what mercy couldn't. She slept on a pallet by the stove with the dog curled against her, and I slept in the bunk and lay awake listening to the unfamiliar sound of another person breathing in my house, and I felt something I had not felt in so long I'd nearly forgotten its name. I'll tell you what it was because I've had years to name it now. It was the feeling of being needed, of mattering to something beyond myself. I had spent 40 years convincing myself I didn't want that I'd cut it out of myself clean, and 3 nights with a half-frozen girl on my floor showed me I'd done no such thing. I'd only buried it, and it had been down there the whole time, waiting, patient as a seed. The story came out slow, over those first weeks, the way blood comes out of a deep wound, not all at once but steady, in a dark seep that won't quite stop. She'd been born to a woman who didn't want her and given to the state that didn't either. She'd been passed from house to house her whole life, a parcel nobody signed for. Some of the houses had been merely indifferent. She spoke of those almost fondly. Indifference, she'd learned, was the best a child like her could hope for. Some of the other houses had been worse than indifferent, and about those she did not speak at all. But I saw their marks on her in the way she flinched at sudden movement, and the way she'd learned to make herself small, and the way she watched my hands. At 18, the state had been done with her. That's how it works, she explained, in that flat voice she used for the worst things. One day you're somebody's responsibility, drawing somebody a check. The next day you're 18 and you're nobody's anything, and they hand you a garbage bag with your belongings in it, and they wish you luck and they close the door. And the world that never wanted you in the first place is suddenly all yours to survive. She'd survived it for 3 years. Couch to couch, job to job, the kind that don't ask questions and don't pay enough to live. A man who said he loved her and showed it with his fists. Another who didn't bother saying it. A bus ticket as far as the money would carry her, which turned out to be the little town at the foot of this mountain, where she'd walked up into the high country with no plan at all except, maybe, to find a quiet place to stop being cold for good. I've never had a home, she said. She said it to the stove, not to me. She said it the way you'd report the weather. Not once. Not one single place in my whole life where somebody wanted me to be there, where I could close a door and it was mine. I used to think everybody got one eventually, like it was just a thing that happened to you when you got old enough. She turned the coffee cup in her hands. I don't think that anymore. I want to tell you I said something wise. I didn't. I sat there, an old man who'd spent his life running from people, looking at a girl who'd spent her life being run from, and I felt the whole stupid waste of it rise up in my throat until I couldn't have spoken if I'd tried. What I did instead, I did the next morning. I got up before her, the way I always did. I built up the fire, and while the coffee boiled I took down the good wool coat, my coat, the one I'd laid over her on the ridge from the peg by the door, and I folded it, and I set it on the foot of her pallet where she'd see it when she woke. It wasn't much, I know that, a coat, but I'd carried that coat through a war and out the other side. I'd worn it for 30 years of mountain winters. It was, I think, the single thing I owned that I'd have grieved to lose. And I gave it to her without a word because I didn't have the words, and because I'd understood, lying awake those nights, that this girl had spent her entire life being given the leftovers, the cast-offs, the things nobody else wanted, and that maybe the only way to start undoing that was to give her something I wanted very much to keep. She came awake slow. I watched her see the coat. I watched her understand what it was. And I watched her face do something complicated and painful because she didn't have any framework for it, because in 21 years of life nobody had ever given her the best thing they owned, and she didn't know where to put a kindness that size. It frightened her more than cruelty ever had. Cruelty she understood. Cruelty had rules. "I can't take this," she said. "You already have," I said. I gave it, can't ungive it. That's not how giving works. Why? She said again, and this time her voice cracked clean down the middle, and the suspicion was gone out of it, and there was only the raw, bewildered hurt of it, the not understanding, the terrible, vulnerable wanting that she'd spent her whole life learning to hide. Why would you give me your coat? You don't even know me. I could be anybody. I could rob you in your sleep. I could be lying about all of it. You don't know. I thought about how to answer that. I thought about it for a long time. Long enough that the coffee boiled over and hissed on the stove, and neither of us moved to deal with it. My wife died 41 years ago, I said. I had not spoken that sentence aloud in longer than I could remember. Before I came up this mountain, we had a daughter. She died too, the same fever, the same week, 2 years old. I had to stop. Even after all that time, I had to stop. I came up here because I couldn't be down there anymore. Down there with all the people who got to keep their families. And I told myself I didn't need anybody, and I built a life out of that lie, and I lived it so long I forgot it was a lie. I looked at her. You asked why, that's why. Because I had a daughter once and I couldn't save her, and you're sitting on my floor and I can. That's the whole reason. There isn't a better one. She started to cry then. Not pretty crying. The other kind, the kind that comes up out of a place that's been sealed off so long the seal tears when it breaks. She cried the way she ate that first night, like something she couldn't stop and was ashamed of and couldn't help. And I did the only thing I knew how to do, which was to come around the table and sit down on the floor beside her, an old man with bad knees lowering himself down slow, and I didn't touch her because I didn't know if touch was safe for her. But I sat close enough that she'd know I was there, and I let her cry, and the dog pushed in between us and made it bearable the way dogs do. When it was done, when she was wrung out and quiet, and the snow was coming down soft past the window, she wiped her face on the sleeve of the coat that was hers now, and she said something so quiet I almost missed it. I don't know how to stay somewhere, she said. I never learned how. I only know how to leave before I get left. Then we'll learn it, I said, slow, there's no hurry up here. The mountain's got nothing but time, and it turns out so do I. She looked at me for a long moment, and something settled in her face. Not trust, not yet. Trust was a long road, and we were standing at the very start of it. But something. The first plank laid across a chasm. The willingness to maybe, possibly, against all the evidence of her whole hard life, find out what was on the other side. I want to slow down here because what happened over those first weeks was not one thing but 1,000 small things, and it's the small things that built the home, not the grand gesture of a coat on a cold morning. The coat was the beginning. The home was made of everything after. The first week, she would not let me see her sleep. She'd lie down on the pallet and pretend, and only when she was certain I'd gone under would she actually let herself go, and even then she slept the way a hunted animal sleeps, surfacing at every shift of the wind, every pop of the stove, every creak of the old logs settling in the cold. I knew because I wasn't sleeping much either in those days. I'd lie in the bunk and listen to her not sleeping and feel the strangeness of 2 grown people in one small room, both pretending to be asleep, so the other one could rest. And there was something almost funny in it, if you had the right kind of sad sense of humor, which after my life I surely did. The second week she started doing things. Small things. I'd come in from the wood and find she'd swept the floor or scrubbed the pot or stacked the kindling. Always more than her share of any work, always before I asked, and I understood after a while that this too was a thing she'd learned. That a child who's passed from house to house survives by being useful, by earning her keep before anyone can decide she isn't worth it. She was paying rent on a room nobody was charging her for, because she didn't know how else to deserve a roof. You don't have to do all that, I told her once, watching her haul water up from the creek in the gray cold, her breath smoking, her jaw set. I know I don't have to, she said, and there was an edge in it. I want to, let me want to. So I let her. That was a thing I had to learn that winter, when to give and when to step back and let her give, because she needed to give as bad as she needed to receive, maybe worse. A person who's only ever been on the taking end of charity learns to hate the taste of it. What she needed wasn't to be given a home. It was to build one, to have a hand in it, to be necessary to it. So I started letting her be necessary. I'd forget to do things I'd done alone for 40 years, so she could do them. I'd ask her opinion on matters I'd long since settled in my own mind, so she'd learn the strange new fact that her opinion was wanted. The first time I asked her what she thought we ought to do about the leak in the north corner of the roof, she looked at me like I'd asked her to perform surgery. Nobody, I gathered, had ever once asked Wren what she thought ought to be done about anything. I don't know anything about roofs, she said. Neither did I once. Come look at it with me, 2 sets of eyes. She came and looked at it with me. She had ideas, it turned out, good ones. She saw a way to channel the meltwater off toward the eave that I'd have missed on my own, and when we fixed it her way and it held through the next thaw, I watched her look at that dry corner of the cabin with an expression I'd never seen on her before. Pride, plain ownership. I did that. That's mine. I made this place better and it stayed better because of me. It seems like such a small thing to you, maybe. A roof. But I'm telling you, I watched a girl who'd been told her whole life that she was a burden discover that she could be the opposite of a burden, and it was like watching something grow toward the light. You could almost see it happening. There were hard days, too. I won't pretend it was all gentle progress. There were days the past came up in her like floodwater, and she'd go somewhere behind her eyes that I couldn't follow, somewhere cold and far. And on those days she'd flinch from everything and snap at me. And once she put her fist through the window over the wash basin, just drove it straight through the glass, and stood there with her knuckles bleeding and her chest heaving, and a look on her face like she was waiting for me to do what everyone before me had done. To yell, to raise a hand, to pack her bag and put her out in the snow, to prove finally that I was like all the rest, that the kindness had been a lie, that nothing good lasts and no one stays. I didn't yell. I got the bandages. I cleaned the glass out of her hand, slow and careful, while she sat rigid and braced for the blow that didn't come, and when I was done I taped a square of oilcloth over the broken window and I said, "We'll get glass in town come spring. It'll do till then." "I broke your window," she said. Her voice was strange, disbelieving. "You did," I agreed. "Windows break. I've broke a few myself in my time when the dark got bad. There's no winter so long it can't be got through. We'll mend the window when we can. You're not going anywhere over a pane of glass." She stared at me, and then she said the thing that I think about more than almost anything else she ever said to me, because it told me the whole shape of what had been done to her, the whole architecture of her fear. "You're supposed to be done with me now," she whispered. "I did the thing, the bad thing, the one that makes them done with you. Everybody has one. You're supposed to be done." "I'm not done with you," I said. "I'm not ever going to be done with you, you hear me? You can break every window in this cabin. You can scream at me till your throat gives out. You can do every single thing you ever did that made somebody send you back, and I will still be here in the morning building up the fire, and you will still be welcome at this table. That's what this is, Wren. That's what I'm offering you. Not a place to stay. A place you can't get sent back from. For life. However long mine lasts and yours after it. A home. The real kind. The kind that doesn't have a door you can be put out of." She didn't cry that time. She'd cried herself out weeks back. She just looked at me for a long, long time, with her bandaged hand cradled in her lap and the oilcloth flapping a little where the wind found the broken window, and something in her face, I don't have a better word for it, anchored. Like a boat that's been adrift its whole life feeling the bottom catch. Feeling itself, for the first time, held in place against the current. "Okay," she said. "Just that, okay. It doesn't sound like much, but I have lived a long time, and I'm telling you, I have heard men make grand speeches that meant less than that one small word from that one frightened girl. Okay, I'll stay. I'll try. I'll risk it. I'll let you matter to me even though everyone who ever mattered to me has hurt me or left me or both. Okay. I have wondered since whether she knew that morning what she was agreeing to, whether I knew what I was offering. I don't think either of us did. We were two broken people in a cabin in the snow, reaching toward each other across everything that had taught us not to. We couldn't have known what would come of it, the good of it and the hard of it both. The thing that would test us worse than any winter that was already coming up the mountain toward us even then, though we didn't know it yet. But that morning, with the coffee ruined and the snow falling and the dog warm between us, we didn't have to know. We only had to say okay. And we did. If you've ever loved somebody who was taught not to be loved, you already know the thing I'm about to tell you. And if you haven't, if you've been lucky, if somebody held you from the very start and never let go, then I need you to listen close, because this is the part that's hard to believe until you've lived it. The danger isn't that they'll leave. Everybody worries about that, and it's real enough. The danger is what happens inside a person when, against everything they've braced for, somebody actually stays. When the thing they wanted so bad they buried the wanting finally arrives, and they don't know how to hold it. When happiness starts to feel like a trap, because in their whole experience, the higher you climb the worse the fall, and the only sin worse than wanting something is letting yourself believe you get to keep it. That winter, I learned that saving a person from the cold is the easy part. The hard part comes after, when you have to help them survive the thing they're least prepared for, which is being safe. Stay with me. We're not at the end yet. We're not close. The snow came down through November and didn't stop. It buried the wood pile to the eaves and turned the creek to a black ribbon under white, and it closed the pass below us so completely that I knew we wouldn't see the town again until spring opened it back up. I'd wintered alone up there more times than I could count and never minded the isolation. It was different that year, having her. The cabin that had always felt like exactly enough room for one man felt suddenly small with two, and then, as the weeks turned, it felt right. It felt the way a thing feels when it finally has the contents it was built to hold, even though I'd built it for a different life entirely. We fell into a rhythm. I taught her things. That surprised both of us, how much I had to teach, how much she wanted to learn. I showed her how to read the sky for weather, how to set a snare, how to split a round of wood so the grain did the work instead of your back. She had quick hands and quicker eyes and a kind of fierce focus that I came to understand was the focus of a person who had never before been allowed to be good at anything. Every skill she mastered was a small reclamation. Every competence was a brick in a wall against the old voice that told her she was worthless. She learned to bake bread in the cast iron and burned 3 loaves black before she got it. And the morning she finally pulled out a good one, golden, risen, the crust crackling as it cooled. She stood over it with her hands on her hips and looked at it with such open delight that I had to turn away and pretend to tend the fire, because the sight of that delight on that face that had known so little of it was almost more than I could stand. "Try it," she said. "Tell me if it's good, tell me the truth." I tried it, it was good. I told her the truth. She ate her own slice slow, savoring it, and then she said in a wondering kind of voice, "I made something good. I made a good thing and it came out of me and now it exists." She looked at me. "Is that what it feels like, to make things, to have things you made?" "That's what it feels like," I said. "Huh," she said softly, and ate the rest of her bread. And I swear to you I have eaten in fine houses and rough camps the world over, and I have never seen anybody enjoy a piece of bread the way Wren enjoyed the first good loaf she ever baked with her own 2 hands. I started keeping a log around that time. I should mention that. I'd kept one off and on for years, just a cheap pasteboard notebook where I wrote down weather and game and the occasional thought, the way a solitary man will, to have something to talk to. But after Wren came, I found myself writing in it more and writing different things. She laughed today. I wrote one evening. First time I heard it. Sounds like she's surprised by it every time, like she didn't know she had it in her. And another, she asked could she plant a garden come spring. Asked it careful, like I might say no. A garden means she's thinking about spring. Means she's thinking about being here in spring. I said yes so fast I think I scared her. I look at that notebook now, sometimes. The handwriting going shaky toward the end of the entries, late at night, by lamplight. A whole winter of a girl coming back to life, set down in a dollar notebook by a man who never thought he'd have anything left worth writing down. But the dark came too. It always came. It came worst at night, in the deep cold hours when there was nothing to do but lie still and let the mind go where it would. I'd hear her on the pallet, not crying. She rarely cried anymore, but breathing wrong, fast and shallow, and I learned the sound of it, the sound of her drowning in something I couldn't see. The first few times I didn't know what to do, so I did nothing, and lay there feeling useless while she fought it alone in the dark. Then one night I just started talking, quiet, into the dark. I didn't ask her what was wrong or tell her it would be all right. I'd learned by then that those were the wrong words, that they pushed her further under. I just talked, about nothing, about the ram's skull on the shelf and where I'd found it, about a horse I'd had as a boy, about the war a little, the parts I could say, about my wife, whose name was Anne, and the way she'd laughed, and the song she used to sing while she worked that I could still hear if the night was quiet enough. And slowly across the cold room I'd hear her breathing come back down, slow and even, anchored again. She never thanked me for it and I never mentioned it in the daylight, but it became a thing we did on the bad nights. She'd start to drown and I'd start to talk, and the talk would be a rope she could find in the dark and follow back up to the surface. One of those nights she talked back. There was a house, she said. Her voice came small and flat out of the dark, and I went still because I knew she was about to give me something she'd never given anybody, and I knew I had to receive it exactly right or she'd never give me anything again. When I was 9, the Garretts, I thought. She stopped, started over. They were nice at first. They were always nice at first, but this time I let myself believe it. I was 9 and I let myself believe they were going to keep me. I started calling her mom. I asked could I call her mom and she said yes, and I thought that meant another stop. The wind moved over the roof. They gave me back at Christmas, right at Christmas. There was a problem with the money, the checks. I don't even know, I was 9, but they sat me down and they were so nice about it, and they said it just wasn't going to work out, and a woman came in a car and I had my bag. I always had my bag ready. You learn to keep your bag ready, and I remember looking back at the house with the lights in the windows, the Christmas lights, and she was already going back inside. The woman I'd called Mom. She was already going back inside before the car even pulled away. She didn't even watch me go. I lay there in the dark and felt something in my chest that I can only describe as a kind of holy fury. Not at any one of those people, the Garretts or the rest, though God knows they earned it. A larger fury. At the whole arrangement of a world that could take a 9-year-old child and teach her to keep her bag packed. That could make, I always had my bag ready. A sentence a person says flat, like it's normal, like it's just how childhood goes. That's when I stopped, she said, calling anybody that, believing it. I figured it out that Christmas. There's 2 kinds of people in the world. People who have a place and people who don't, and you're born one or the other and you don't get to change it. And the only thing worse than not having a place is forgetting for a little while that you don't, because then they get to take it away from you all over again. Her voice had gone very quiet. So I stopped forgetting. I made real sure I never forgot again. I didn't say anything for a while. I let the words sit in the room with us, gave them their weight, didn't rush to fix them or argue them away. Then I said, "And used to say there's no such thing as a person who doesn't have a place. She said there's only people who haven't found theirs yet, and people who found theirs and got robbed of it, and the robbing is a crime against heaven, but it's not the truth about the person. The truth about the person is they were always meant to have a place. Everybody is. It's the most natural thing in the world. It's the world that's unnatural, when it can't manage to give people the places they were born deserving." The dark was quiet. "I don't know if I believe that," she said finally. "You don't have to believe it yet," I said. "I'll believe it for you till you can. That's allowed. I've got plenty of belief I'm not using. You can borrow it long as you need." She was quiet a long time after that. And then, just before sleep took her, so soft I might have dreamed it. Okay. There was one night, in the dead middle of that winter when she almost left. I want to tell it because it's true, and because leaving out the hard parts would make a lie out of the whole thing. It was a bad week. The cold had settled in mean and unrelenting, the kind that gets into your head as much as your bones, and something had soured in her, some anniversary, maybe, of one of the bad houses, some date her body remembered even when her mind didn't. She'd gone quiet and far for 3 days, and on the third night I woke to the sound of the door. She had her bag. The same bag, I understood. The bag she always kept ready. She had it over her shoulder, and she had the wool coat on, and she had the door half open and the cold pouring in around her, and she was standing there in the dark with her hand on the latch, and when I sat up she froze like a thief caught. I didn't jump up. I didn't shout. I just sat there in the bunk and looked at her in the faint red light of the bank stove. "It's 20 below out there," I said. "You'll be dead before you reach the pass." "I know," she said. Her voice was strange and tight. "I know that. That's not, I'm not even, I don't know why I'm doing this." And she started to shake, standing there, half in and half out the door. "I just got scared. I got so scared. Everything's good and I can't stand it. I can't stand how good it is, because good things get taken, and I'd rather take it away myself than wait for somebody to take it from me. At least if I leave, it's mine. At least if I do it, it's me doing it and not it being done to me. Do you understand? Please tell me you understand, because I don't understand myself at all." And the terrible thing is, I did understand. I understood it all the way down. The logic of a person so used to losing that they'll burn the house down themselves rather than live in dread of the fire. I'd had a version of it myself, hadn't I? 40 years on a mountain alone, because if you never love anything, you can never lose it. I'd run from people for 4 decades for the very same reason this girl was standing in my doorway in 20 below dark with her bag packed. We were the same animal. We just run in different directions. "Close the door," I said. "You're letting the heat out. Close the door and come sit down, and if you still want to leave in the morning when it's light and it's warmer and you can think, I'll walk you to the pass myself. I won't stop you. I'll never stop you, but not like this. Not in the dark, not scared, not in 20 below. A person shouldn't decide the big things scared and freezing in the dark. Close the door, Wren." She stood there a long, long moment. The cold poured in. The dog whined. And then she closed the door. She came and sat down by the stove, the bag still on her shoulder, and I came and sat down near her, and neither of us said anything for a long while. Then I said, "Anne left me once. Did I ever tell you that?" She looked up, startled out of her own dark by the surprise of it. "No." "Early on. We were young and stupid, and we'd had a fight. I don't even recall what about. And she packed a bag and walked out to her sister's and was gone 4 days. And I want to tell you, those 4 days taught me more than the 20 good years after, because I found out a thing. I found out that the leaving doesn't protect you from the losing. She left to get ahead of the hurt, same as you're trying to do, and all it did was give us both the hurt early, for nothing, for no reason. 4 days of misery, we could have had 4 good days instead. The leaving's not safety. It just feels like it. It's the same loss, only you did it to yourself and called it control." I looked at her. "You can stay scared, Wren. That's allowed. You can be scared every day for the rest of your life that I'll be taken from you or you from me. But don't let the being scared make the taking happen sooner. Don't hand the dark a thing it'd have had to come fight you for." She set the bag down on the floor. She never picked it up again. I know because I checked in the weeks after. That bag sat in the corner gathering dust, and one day in the spring I noticed she'd unpacked it, finally, put the few sad things in it onto the shelf I'd cleared for her, and folded the empty bag away under the bunk where you put a thing you don't expect to need. I didn't say anything about it. Some victories you don't point at. You just let them stand. It started as a cough, the kind you don't think anything of, the kind everybody gets in the cold months. But it went down into her chest and set up there and got worse, and within a week she was burning with fever and rattling when she breathed. and I knew enough to know it was the lung sickness, the kind that killed, the kind that had killed my Anne and my daughter both in a single terrible week 41 years before. I want you to understand what that was like for me. To watch fever climb in someone I loved in that same cabin, with the pass closed and no doctor within 40 miles of impassable snow, the exact way I'd watched it once before and lost everything. The past doesn't stay buried. It comes for you. It came for me that week with a vengeance, and there were hours, tending her, sponging the heat off her brow with creek water, forcing broth between her cracked lips, when I genuinely did not know if I was nursing Wren or if I'd come unstuck in time, and was back in that other sick room losing the others all over again. She got worse before she got better. There was a night, the worst night, the night the fever peaked when she stopped knowing where she was. She thrashed and called out names I didn't know, names of people who'd hurt her, and she begged in a child's voice not to be sent back. Please, she'd be good, she'd be so good. Please don't make her go. And I held her down gentle so she wouldn't hurt herself, and I said over and over, "You're home, you're home. Nobody's sending you anywhere, you're home and you're staying, I've got you, I've got you." Until the words ran together into one long sound that was less language than it was just the noise a person makes when they are refusing, with everything they have, to let death take one more thing from them. I didn't sleep for 3 days. The dog didn't either. Juniper lay against Wren's side the whole time, that old gray dog, and would not be moved, and I'll always think, that the warmth of her and the steadiness of her breathing did as much as my broth and my prayers to hold Wren on this side of the dark. On the 4th night, the fever broke. I felt it break. I had my hand on her forehead and I felt the heat go out of her all at once, the way a storm passes, and she sank down into a real sleep, a deep one, the rattle gone quiet in her chest, and I sat back against the wall and put my face in my hands, and I wept like I had not wept since I was a young man burying my wife. I wept out of terror and exhaustion and relief, and the unbearable, impossible mercy of being given back a thing I had been so sure I was about to lose. The mountain had taken my family once. That night, for reasons I'll never deserve to understand, it let me keep this one. When she woke near dawn, weak as a newborn but clear-eyed, the first thing she did was look around the cabin, the stove, the shelves, the ram's skull, the gray light coming in the window we'd patched with oilcloth, and I watched her remember where she was. And I watched her understand that she was still there, that she hadn't been sent anywhere, that she'd done the thing children get sent back for, gotten sick, become a burden, cost somebody days and nights of trouble, and the somebody was still right there, ruined-looking and red-eyed in the corner, and hadn't gone anywhere at all. "You stayed," she said. Her voice was a thread. "Course I stayed. I was so much trouble. I heard myself. I was awful. I said awful things. You were sick. You didn't say one thing I held against you. Not one." She closed her eyes. A tear ran down out of the corner of one down into her hair. "I kept waiting to wake up and have you be gone," she said. "Even out of my head I kept waiting for it. That's the part that," her breath hitched, "that's the part I can't get over, that you were just there. Every time, however bad it got, you were just there." "I'll always be there," I said. "I keep telling you. You're not hearing me yet, but you will. One of these days it's going to go all the way in what I'm telling you. There's no version of this where I'm not there. That's done. That's decided. That's the one thing in your whole life you don't have to wonder about anymore." She opened her eyes and looked at me, and for the first time, for the very first time in all those months, I saw her let herself believe it, not borrow my belief. Believe it herself. I watched it go in, the way I'd promised her it would, all the way down to the bottom of her, to the place where the 9-year-old still stood in the snow watching a woman go back inside without looking. I watched that frozen child, somewhere deep in the grown woman's eyes, finally come in out of the cold. "I'm home," she said, testing it, saying it like the first good loaf of bread, like a thing she'd made that had come out right and now existed in the world. "You're home," I said. She mended slow through the back end of that winter. I wouldn't let her lift a finger, and it drove her near to madness. This woman who'd learned to earn her keep, lying useless while an old man waited on her hand and foot. But I think she needed that too. I think she needed, once in her life, to be cared for without earning it, to be worth the trouble simply because she was herself and not because of anything she did. To learn that love isn't rent, that you don't pay it down, that it's just given, the way I'd given her the coat, freely and without a bill at the end. By the time the first thaw came and the icicles started there dripping off the eaves, and the creek began to talk again under its skin of ice, she was strong enough to walk to the wood pile and back, and then strong enough to split a round or two, and then strong enough to stand on the porch in the watery spring sun with her face turned up to it and her hands in the pockets of the wool coat that was hers now, fully and forever hers, and call out to me where I was working in the yard. "It's warm, you feel that? It's actually warm." "Spring's coming," I said. "I made it," she said, and she didn't just mean the winter. I knew she didn't just mean the winter. I actually made it through. "You did, we did." She came down off the porch and stood beside me in the yard, and we looked together at the mountain shrugging off its winter, the snow pulling back up the slopes, the first black earth showing through, the high peaks still white but the whole world below them softening, loosening, coming back to life. And she said a thing then that I've kept with me ever since. "You know what I figured out being sick?" She didn't look at me, she looked at the mountain. "I always thought a home was a place. Like the thing I never had was a building, a door, a room with my name on it, and I'd see other people's houses and I'd think that's the thing they have and I don't, that house, those walls." She shook her head slow. "But it's not the walls. I was dying in here and I wasn't scared of dying, not really. I was scared of dying alone, the way I'd always known I would. And then I wasn't alone. You were just there and I figured it out. The home was never the walls. The home was somebody staying. That's the whole thing. That's all it ever was. Somebody who stays even when it's hard, even when you're trouble, even when you're sick and awful and breaking the windows. The walls are just where the staying happens." I didn't trust myself to answer that. I just put my arm around her shoulders, careful, the way you'd handle something you'd nearly lost, and she let me, which a year before she could not have done, and we stood there in the thawing yard, an old man and the daughter the mountain had given back to him, and watched the spring come up the valley toward us. She smiled at me then, a real one. The whole thing surfaced and stayed up, no trout, no flicker, just a young woman smiling in the spring sun outside the door of a place that was hers. And I tell you, I felt like the richest man who ever lived, richer than I'd ever been with Anne even, because I'd learned by then exactly what a thing was worth, and I'd nearly lost it, and I'd been given it back. I should have known. That's the thing about the mountain, about life, about getting older. You learn that the moments of pure light are the ones the dark sets its sights on. I should have known the spring that opened the pass and let the warmth back in would also let the rest of the world back in. The world that had never wanted her. The world that, it turned out, was not entirely done with her after all. Because down in the town at the foot of the mountain, while we'd been wintering safe and snowbound and learning how to be a family, a man had been asking questions. A man in an official-looking coat, with official-looking papers, who'd come up from the city looking for a girl named Wren. And when the pass opened, he was going to come up the mountain looking for her. But that's the next part, and I need to gather myself before I tell it. Some things you have to take a breath before you can say. He came up the mountain on a clear day in late April, when the pass had been open a week, and the wildflowers were just starting in the high meadows. I saw him before he saw us, a figure on the trail far down the slope, moving slow and careful the way a town man moves on mountain ground, stopping often to catch his breath. I knew right away he wasn't a hunter or a hiker. Hunters and hikers move different. This man moved like a man with an errand, like a man who'd been told where to go and didn't want to be going there but was going anyway. Wren was in the garden she'd planted, turning the black earth with a spade I'd sharpened for her, her sleeves rolled up, dirt to the elbows, more at peace in her own body than I'd ever seen her. I almost didn't tell her. I stood on the porch and watched that figure climb toward us, and I thought, for one long ugly moment, about getting the rifle, about meeting that man down the trail before he ever reached the cabin and turning him around, whatever it took. The mountain is a big place. People go up it and don't come down. I'd be lying if I said the thought didn't cross my mind full-formed and serious, because by then I'd have done just about anything to keep what I had. But Wren had seen him too. She'd straightened up from the garden with the spade in her hand, and she was watching him climb, and her whole body had gone rigid in a way I recognized, the old way, the hunted way, the way she hadn't stood since the worst of the winter. "That's a state car parked down at the trailhead," she said. Her voice had gone flat and far. "I saw it from up here this morning. I told myself it wasn't. I told myself I was being crazy." The spade was shaking in her hands. "They found me after all this. They found me." "You're not a child anymore," I said. "You're a grown woman. There's no state can tell a grown woman where to live. Whatever that man wants, you don't have to give it to him. You hear me? You're free. You've been free since you turned 18. He can't make you do anything." But I saw in her face that the words weren't reaching, because the fear in her wasn't a fear of law or papers. It was older than that. It was the fear of the 9-year-old in the snow. It was the bone-deep certainty that the good thing was going to be taken, that it was always going to be taken, that she'd been a fool to forget even for a season that people like her don't get to keep the things they love. She set the spade down, finally, slow and deliberate, and she walked over to me on the porch, and she did something she had never once done in all our time. She took my hand, held it. Her dirt-black fingers wrapped around my old knuckles, and I could feel her shaking through them. "If they make me go," she said, very quiet, not looking at me, looking down the trail at the climbing figure. "If there's some paper, something, some reason, promise me you'll remember it was real. This, the winter, all of it. Promise me you'll remember it happened even if they take it away. Because I spent my whole life having things turn out not to have been real. The Garretts weren't real. The mom, none of it. They could just decide it didn't count, and then it didn't. And I can't," her voice failed. "I can't have this be one of those. I'd rather you'd never picked me up off that ridge than have this turn out to be one of those." I turned and took her by both shoulders and made her look at me, and I said, "Nothing and nobody can make this not have been real. There's no paper on God's earth with that power. This happened. You happened. We happened. And if that man's come to take you somewhere, he's going to have to come through me to do it, and I may be old, but I am not yet so old that I'll let one more soul on this earth treat you like a parcel. You're not a parcel. You're my family. Now stand up straight and let's go find out what he wants. The two of us together, the way we do everything now." She stood up straight. She kept hold of my hand. And together, we walked down off the porch to meet whatever was coming up the mountain. The man's name was Holloway. He was younger than me by 20 years and looked done in by the climb, sweating through his good shirt, and he had a leather folder of papers that he held onto like a shield. He was not, I want to be fair, a cruel man. I came to understand that. He was just a man doing a job that had brought him to a strange place to say a hard thing. "I'm looking for Wren Adler," he said when he'd got his breath on my porch. "I was told in town she might have come up this way." He looked between us, the old mountain man and the young woman with dirt to her elbows and a death grip on a garden spade. "Are you Wren?" She didn't answer, couldn't, I think. "What's your business with her?" I said. He opened the folder, and I braced myself, the way you brace before a blow, for whatever bureaucratic cruelty was about to come out of it, some debt, some charge, some old institutional hook sunk in her that they meant to drag her back by. "Her grandmother died," Holloway said. The words just sat there in the spring air, not at all the words I'd braced for. "Margaret Adler," he went on, gentler now, because I think he saw on both our faces that we'd been expecting something else entirely. "She passed 3 months ago, down in the city. She'd been looking for Wren for years, near as we can tell. She didn't know Wren existed until late. There was a falling out way back with Wren's mother, and Margaret never knew her daughter had a child until her daughter passed too, And by then Wren was already in the system and the records were, he shook his head. The records were a mess. They lose children, you understand. The system loses them. By the time Margaret started looking, Wren had aged out and dropped off the rolls entirely. She hired people. She spent what she had. She never found her. He drew out a paper. She left everything to her. A house, some money. Not a fortune, but a house, free and clear and enough to live on careful. She left instructions that we were to keep looking after she was gone until we found you. He looked up at Wren. It took us 3 more months. You're a hard person to find, Miss Adler. But your grandmother, she didn't want you to go your whole life thinking nobody was looking. She wanted you to know somebody was looking the whole time. She made me promise to tell you that part especial, that somebody was looking. I have seen strong men fall in battle. I have seen a lot of things in my long life that I'd give much to unsee. But I am not sure I have ever seen anything that took the legs out from under me like the sight of Wren's face in that moment. The face of a woman being told, at 21, after a lifetime of believing herself wanted by no one, that there had been someone. That somewhere out in that indifferent world, a woman had spent the last of her years, and her money searching for the granddaughter she never got to hold. That Wren had not, after all, been unwanted. She had only been unfound. The spade dropped out of her hands. She sat down right there in the dirt of the garden she'd planted, sat down hard, and she made a sound I'd never heard her make, a sound that had no crying in it and no words, just the raw noise of a whole life's worth of belief breaking apart at once. The belief that she was nobody's. The belief she'd built her entire self around. Gone, in a sentence, on a spring morning with the dirt black under her hands. Holloway stayed long enough to give us the papers and the particulars, and then he made his careful way back down the mountain, and I think he was glad to go. Some errands sit heavy on a man even when they end in something like mercy. Wren and I sat on the porch a long time after he'd gone. The afternoon stretched out gold and quiet over the valley. She held the papers in her lap, the deed to a house she'd never seen, in a city she'd left, willed to her by a woman she'd never known had existed. There was a photograph in with the papers. Holloway had left it without a word, just slipped it in among the documents, and I think it was the kindest thing the man did all day. It was old, the colors gone soft, and it showed a woman maybe 60, gray-haired, standing in front of a small white house with her hands shading her eyes against the sun. Margaret Adler, the grandmother. Wren stared at that photograph for the longest time, and I watched her search that stranger's face the way you'd search a map of a country you'd been exiled from your whole life and never knew the name of. "He's got my hands," Wren said at last, soft. "Look, the same hands. I always wondered where my hands came from. You spend your whole life not looking like anybody, not belonging to a single face anywhere on earth, and here she is. She's got my hands." She pressed the photograph flat against her chest, both palms over it, the way she'd pressed her hand to old Juniper's ribs that first night to check the breathing was real. She was looking for me the whole time, while I was getting sent back at Christmas. While I was sleeping in bus stations, while I was up on that ridge waiting to freeze. Somewhere this whole time there was an old woman with my hands, spending everything she had trying to find me. She made a small wounded sound. Why does that hurt worse than thinking nobody wanted me? It shouldn't hurt worse. Why does it hurt worse? Because now you've got to grieve her, I said. You can't grieve what you never knew you had. She gave you a person to have lost. That's a terrible gift and a real one. It's the realest thing anybody ever gave you, maybe, besides the chance to know somebody loved you the whole time you thought you were alone. Both those things are true at once. They're going to be true at once for the rest of your life. That's just how it is with the big things. They don't come clean. She cried then, but it was a different crying than the winter crying. Slower, less like a wound and more like rain. Grief, the ordinary human kind, the kind that means you had something worth grieving. I'd have given a great deal to spare her it. But I'd learned by then there's some pain you can't and shouldn't spare a person, because it's the cost of having loved, and the having loved is worth the cost. And to take the pain would be to take the love along with it. "A house," she said, picking the thread back up after a while, turning the deed in her dirt-stained hands. "An actual house. Mine. She ran her thumb over the deed. I could go down there, I could have the thing I always, the walls, the door, the room with my name on it, I could finally have it. She gave a laugh that had something broken in it. Isn't that something? All I ever wanted my whole life, and it was waiting the whole time, and I never knew. And here is where I made the choice. The hard one. The one I'll answer for, one way or the other, when my time comes. Because every selfish bone in my body wanted to say don't go. Wanted to say you have a home here, you said it yourself. The home was never the walls, the home was somebody staying, so stay. Wanted to remind her of every promise, call in every debt of love, hold her to the mountain by the very ties we'd spent a winter weaving. I had been so alone before her. I knew exactly how alone I'd be after. The cabin had felt right with two in it. I did not want to learn again how it felt with one. But I had told her that first morning, with the coffee boiling over and the snow coming down, I had told her the truth about what a home was. A place you can't get sent back from. A place with no door you can be put out of. And I understood, sitting on that porch, that a home you can't leave is just a prettier kind of cage. That if my staying meant she couldn't go, if the love I'd given her had hooks in it, conditions, a bill at the end after all, then I'd given her the same thing everyone else had, only dressed up kinder. And I would not do that to her. I had promised her better. I had promised her a home for life, and I'd come to understand, too late and just in time, that a real home for life is one a person is free to walk out of, and chooses not to, or chooses to, and is loved exactly the same either way. So I said the hardest thing I have ever said. You should go see it, I said. The house, your grandmother's house. You should go down there and see it and stay in it and find out what it's like to have the walls you always wanted. You've earned that. God knows you've earned that. My voice wanted to break, and I would not let it. And if it's where you belong, then that's where you belong, and I'll be glad for you every single day, even the days it makes me sorry. You don't owe me your life because I gave you a coat. That's not what the coat was for. The coat was never a chain, Wren. It was the opposite of a chain. You go where you need to go. You're free. You've always been free. That's the whole entire point of the thing I was trying to give you. She looked at me for a long, long time. And then she did the thing I will carry with me to my grave. She took the papers, the deed, the will, all of it, and she folded them up slow and careful, and she set them down on the porch boards, and she put a rock on top of them so the wind wouldn't take them. And she stood up, and she walked to the edge of the porch, and she looked out at the mountain going gold in the evening, at the garden she'd planted, at the patched window we still hadn't fixed, at the old gray dog asleep in the last of the sun. I'll go down and sell it, she said. The house, or rent it out maybe, keep it, I don't know yet, but I'm not going to live in it. She turned around and looked at me, and her face was wet, but her voice was steady, steadier than I'd ever heard it. You don't get it, do you? After everything, you still don't get it. She came back and stood in front of me. I had a house my whole life. In my head, I dreamed about it. The walls, the door, all of it. And then I got here, and I was so sick I almost died, and you stayed. And I figured out the walls were never the thing. And now somebody's handed me the walls, the actual walls, finally, and you know what I feel. She shook her head slow. Nothing. I feel nothing about those walls, because I already found the thing the walls were standing in for. I found it up here, in a cabin with a busted window and a coat that smells like an old man and a dog that drools on me all night. Her voice finally cracked, but she kept going. You're my home, not the cabin. You and the dog and the bread and the garden and the talking in the dark when I can't breathe. That's the house I was dreaming about my whole life and didn't know the shape of. Why would I leave the thing itself to go live in a building that just looks like it? I could not speak. I tried and I could not. You offered me a home for life, she said. That first morning with the coffee. You said it, a home for life. And I didn't believe you, I couldn't believe you, nobody had ever, but you meant it. You actually meant it. And I'm holding you to it, old man, for life. Mine and yours, and however long we get. I'm not going anywhere. You gave me the choice. And this is me choosing, and I'm going to keep choosing it every single day on purpose so it counts. So it's mine. So nobody handed it to me and nobody can take it away. She wiped her face with the sleeve of the wool coat. I'm home. I'm finally actually home. and I'm staying, try and stop me. That was 11 years ago. I'm an old man now, older than I had any right to get, and my hands shake when I write this, and the trail to the ridge is too much for my knees most days. Juniper's been gone 9 years, buried up on the rise behind the cabin, under a flat stone Wren chose herself. We've got another dog now, a young one, foolish and good, that Wren named Anne, which undid me the day she did it and undoes me still. She never did go live in the grandmother's house. Sold it in the end, and used the money to put glass in every window of the cabin and add 2 rooms onto the back and buy the bottom 40 acres of the valley so no one could ever crowd us. She made this place better, the way she made everything better, the way she made me better, that half-frozen girl I almost walked past on the ridge because 40 years of solitude had nearly cost me the sense to stop. She drove down to the city, that one time, to settle the grandmother's affairs and to stand for an afternoon in the little white house with her hands shading her eyes the way the woman in the photograph had stood. She told me about it after, quiet in the dark, the way she still tells me the things that go deep. She said she'd walked through every room. She said it was a nice house, a good house, the house she'd dreamed of her whole life right down to the lace at the windows. And she said she'd stood in the middle of it and waited to feel something, waited to feel home, and it never came. The walls were just walls. The rooms were just rooms. And she'd locked the door and driven back up the mountain through the dark, and the only time her chest came loose and let her breathe easy again was when she saw the light I'd left burning in the cabin window, small and gold, far up the black slope, waiting for her. That's when I knew for sure, she told me. Driving up, seeing the light, I thought, there it is. There's the thing I was looking for in all those rooms. It was never in a room. It was a light somebody left on for me. It was somebody up a mountain in the dark, keeping a light burning so I could find my way back. That's all home ever was, a light somebody leaves on, and I finally had one. People down in town, the ones who know the story, they call it a kindness, what I did. The old hermit who took in the lost girl. They've got it backwards, and I've quit trying to correct them. I didn't save Wren. I want that set down plain in case I'm not around much longer to say it. She saved me. I was the one frozen on a ridge. I'd just been frozen so long I'd stopped feeling it, stopped knowing I was dying by inches in a cabin built for one. She came up my mountain, a parcel nobody had signed for, and somewhere in that long winter she signed for me. She's the one who taught me what I thought I was teaching her, that a home is just somebody who stays. I think about that first morning a lot now, the way old men do, turning the bright stones of a life over and over. The coffee boiling over, the snow coming down, a frightened girl on my floor asking why, asking it like the word itself was a wound. And I think about how close I came to walking past her on that ridge. 30 more yards of not looking back and I'd have lost her, and never known what I'd lost, and died alone in my cabin some winter with the dog the only one to find me. The whole of both our lives turned on 30 yards, and an old man's bad knees, slowing him down enough to look twice. I don't believe in much. I gave most of it up in the war, and what was left I lost in a sick room 40 years before Wren came, but I believe in that. I believe that sometimes the mountain takes everything from you, and then, if you live long enough and you're paying attention on the right cold morning, it gives you back something you never thought to ask for. Not what you lost. Never what you lost. Something else. Something that's its own and not a replacement for anything. A second life you didn't earn and can't explain, and spend the rest of your days trying to be worthy of. She's out in the garden now as I write this. I can see her through the good clean glass of the window we finally fixed. She's grown and strong, and she laughs easy these days, the surprise gone out of it. She's got dirt to her elbows and her face turned up to the sun. She doesn't keep her bag packed anymore. Hasn't in years. I checked once a long time back, the way an old man will when he can't quite believe his luck, went looking for that sad little bag under the bunk where she'd folded it away. It was gone, she'd thrown it out. When I asked her, she just looked at me like I was simple. What would I need it for, she said. She doesn't keep her bag packed anymore. Hasn't in years. I checked once a long time back, the way an old man will when he can't quite believe his luck, went looking for that sad little bag under the bunk where she'd folded it away. It was gone. She'd thrown it out. When I asked her, she just looked at me like I was simple.